Join us by the fireside for our evening tales of true life's strange experiences with things that lie beyond the veil of the known and into the misty depths of the mysterious and unknown. A camping nightmare. I used to go to camp with my dad at a seasonal campground from around 2005, 2007. It was in upstate New York and it was in the middle of the Adirondack forest and about a 20-minute drive from the closest town. It is now an agricultural farm and it was closed for unknown reasons. Anyway, families would often bring their campers here and they would just leave them yearly. We were one of those families that did this, and luckily there were other teens there around this time, and we all really got on well. And our ages were from, age range was between 13 to 17 years old. So this story takes place in 2006 in the summer. A few of my camp friends and I were, a little bit bored, and it was around 1 p.m. one day. So we decided to hike into the woods that were behind all the campsites. We'll call my friends Jan, Bridget, Helen, and Asta. There were some well-traveled trails not far in, but we had already walked them many times, so we decided to cut across the trails and just go deeper into the woods. Eventually, we ended up in an uphill, and it was probably about 30-foot wide clearing or something that had what appeared to be a car to the right in the distance. Asta immediately sprinted to the car and exclaimed that it's indeed a very old, very rusted and abandoned car. So the rest of us walked to our very enthusiastic friend. I remember feeling something was very off about that car and requested that we all get away from it. Anyway, Asta kind of laughed at me and jokingly said, "It could be rigged with bombs." Then Bridget hit him in the arm and she yelled at him, "Shut up! Get away from that car! Who knows what could be inside it?" Odd, I thought to myself. Maybe she feels the same way I do. So we start to walk past the car, upward toward what looked like a larger clearing. And then Helen grabbed my right arm and walked beside me, seemingly terrified. Me being about 15 at the time, I was, thought that it was kind of nice that she was holding onto my arm, and I didn't really notice her terror in the beginning. As we reached the large clearing, the ground flattened, and directly in front of us there is a pond that is, completely still. To the left of us, there was this yellow 2-story house that seemed to be abandoned by the looks of things. This clearing was completely surrounded by the rest of the woods. Upon seeing this, I remember the feeling of dread that was washing over me for some inexplicable reason. I didn't know why, but it was suddenly really strong. Meanwhile, Asta and Jan were running towards the house. Bridget, Helen, and I all called out to them and told them to come back and not go near that house. Instead, they noticed an open window and they both climbed inside. As soon as Bridget saw them doing this, she yelled out, "Fine, if you two want to mess around in some creepy house, be my guest." Her scream seemed to fall flat, with no echo. It was almost like it was blocked and couldn't make it to the house. It was so weird and eerie. I've never experienced anything like that before. Bridget finally looked over at Helen and, sounding kind of defeated, she said, "Come on, let's just go back to camp. This place is messed up." We agreed and we started to head back down towards the smaller clearing when we heard what sounded like Jan's scream. We looked back to see Asta and Jan already out of the house and almost up to us. They were both whiter than freshly bleached sheets. I am not kidding. And they were motioning for us to just leave and get out of there. The hike back to camp was pretty uneventful, but Asta and Jan refused to tell us what they saw in there. Asta was still trying to act silly and cool, but he kept glancing behind us. Jan didn't say a word the entire time. We got back to camp and it was about 5:30 p.m. It really didn't feel like we were gone for that long. The whole thing was weird. We all agreed we'd meet up later that night after we ate and showered, etc. Later that night, around 10:30 p.m., the same group of us all met up near the registration building because it had a light similar to a street light. We decided to head down into a field that was at the entrance of the campground behind the dirt road leading from the road back to camp. It was a new moon that night, and we could see the stars more clearly than ever before. It was the brightest I have ever personally seen them. We all exchanged spooky stories in that dark field for quite some time. For some inexplicable reason, all 5 of us stood up at the same time and began to walk back to the dirt road heading back to camp. As we reached the light by the registration office, we all then simultaneously turned around and the light above us flickers out. We all see this tall, 2-legged figure moving in the field we were just in. It moved across the field quickly and silently. Chills just went up and down my spine, and it felt like the cold was trying to reach into my brain itself. This figure was darker than darkness itself, and it appeared to be much taller than all of us. It was hunched and almost appeared to have spikes protruding from it in some way. We were just frozen in terror. None of us moved at all or said anything until the light above us suddenly came back on. The figure was gone suddenly, but it was unnaturally cold still for a summer night. We all just ran to our respective camps. Fast forward to the winter of 2009. I was telling an ex-girlfriend of mine, let's call her Katie, about the above story. She's the type of person who says that she's very sensitive to paranormal events and is always intrigued about them as opposed to being afraid most of the time. She somehow convinces me that she needs to go to the camp I used to go to, but it has been closed and is now that agricultural farm I mentioned above. I decided to drive her and I up there one night in my 2000 Buick Century Limited. Mind you, this car was a beast and could make it through snow with ease due to a really nice traction control system and winter tires. So we arrived up there about 10:30 p.m. and the dirt road wasn't plowed out, so no surprise. I wasn't worried and decided to drive in anyway. My car's a champ and is going through just fine. And we were passing the registration building and we got that same feeling of dread that I felt long ago on that day at the house when we were kids. The engine suddenly cuts out. The car's power is just gone, and the car refuses to start. I look over at my ex, and she's staring straight ahead, and she says, "They're looking at us." I tried to start the car again, and it starts normally, but my traction control is no longer working, and the time has been reset to 12. The car was spinning the tires somehow, and we were still stuck. My headlights were on, and I happened to look at the trees and see multiple of the same figures my camp friends and I saw running between the trees in the distance, and my blood just went cold. I yelled, "Crap, let's just get the hell out of here now." I turned the car off, and it started again. Traction control light is gone and I'm able to move the car. I slammed it into reverse and reversed down the dirt road back to the main road that heads back into civilization. I slammed it in the drive, and the supercharger in that baby was one of the sweetest and most relieving sounds I have ever heard, and especially on that night. The drive back has forest on the same side of the road as the camp for pretty much 10 of the 20-mile trip to town. My ex was staring out the window. Out of nowhere, she mutters something quietly. I tell her I can't hear her and ask if she's all right. She doesn't look at me, but I was able to make out what she said this time. They're following us. They want us. They're the most evil thing I have ever felt, and they want us to go into the house with them. I told her that it's going to be okay and that we'll be safe soon. I told her to stop looking out the window and just focus on clearing her mind. We made it back into town, and I went into the closest gas station that was open and grabbed water and a snack for both my ex and I. I asked the clerk what time it was because both of our phones were dead, and I wanted to reset my clock in my car. And they said, "Oh, you're out early. It's currently 3:49 a.m." I just nodded and paid for my things. I brought my ex to my place so that she wouldn't get into trouble for getting in so late since she lived with her mom. We never spoke of it again, and we broke up about a month later without ever having spoken about it since that night. I have told others about this story, and I have had many people tell me to bring them there. I refuse to bring them or even tell them where this place might be. Nothing can explain the weird things in that place, and even to this day I shudder whenever I think about it. And I will never go back there again or anywhere near it. Wow, what a horrifying experience. I can only wonder what would have happened to you both if that car, that Buick, hadn't started and all those entities and those dark things were just coming at you. Would they have found you both dead in your car the next day? Or, you know, I wonder if anything has happened to anyone there. I don't know. It seems strange that they've closed that off, doesn't it? It makes you wonder if there's a connection. Pretty terrifying indeed. An alternate reality. This happened roughly 3 weeks ago while traveling back from Winnipeg to the Pass, Manitoba, Canada. Myself and a friend that I'll call Dee went to Winnipeg for the day, and traveled there during the evening and came back the following day at 1 p.m. The way to Winnipeg was normal, took us about 6 hours as usual. I've done this trip quite a lot of times. As the Pass is my hometown, which, I've recently moved back to from Winnipeg. On the way back, the first 3.5 hours go by normally and nothing much happened. I was driving the speed limit most of the time as, it was icy and it was also snowing most of the time. So we came up to the turnoff where Highway 6 turns off into the 60 at about maybe 4 p.m. At this point, the conditions are ideal and the sun's just about at the horizon. It was a beautiful sky with a crimson sun. It was just lovely. This is where things just kind of got really strange. The first odd instance happened about 20 minutes on this highway. There was this red van that overtook us right before a right turn, and it rounded a sharp bend. When we came round the bend, the van had just vanished, and it was a long straight high for a bit. I thought this was a bit spooky, but I didn't really pay any mind, nor did I mention it to my friend. Shortly after this, however, I made a comment about how gorgeous the sky was. By this time, the sun was just cresting the horizon. It was about an 11 o'clock angle. And by this time, it was also about 4:45, so we've been on this highway for about 45 minutes. This highway takes about an hour till you get to the next turnoff, the final turnoff en route to the pass. We drove for about 20 minutes without really talking or anything, just the radio playing. And then my friend, Dee, made the comment, "Have you noticed there hasn't been any road signage?" I didn't realize, but it was true. There were no signs indicating when a turn was coming up, nor were there any signs in regards to how far we are from towns in kilometers, no signs of whatsoever. At this point, I noticed the sun hadn't moved an inch in the sky. On top of this, we haven't seen any other vehicles in a while. I thought this was really bizarre, man. I mean, so did my friend. This was just really strange. So, unnerved, I sped up, going between maybe 120 to 140 kilometers per hour. I started having this overwhelming feeling that something was really wrong. Then I noticed another anomaly among the other glaring things that were already making this experience really messed up. All the trees were the same height, and the tree line was extremely dense, like a wall of trees. This was scary because I then realized this scenery was not at all what it should be and what I remembered. Where we should have been, there should have been a sparse tree line with small ponds and marshland on both sides of the highway. We've been on this highway now for, it was about 2 hours. The sun still wasn't moving. Still no road signs, no traffic, and we were not where we should be. Dee and I were stuck on this highway, and we were starting to get scared. We were trying to piece together and figure out what the hell is happening. We've both lived our fair share of paranormal phenomena, not to mention traumatic experiences at that. I've known Dee my whole life, and this experience is undeniably our most terrifying. Out of nowhere, the sun then sets unnaturally fast, which takes maybe 2 minutes. And we were suddenly enveloped in this darkness of a starless sky without a moon. At this point, I was scared. Dee was scared too. We were two 25-year-old men pretty well shaken up, and we didn't know what the hell was going on. And just when this ominous, oppressive feeling had become unbearable, we come to the turnoff, out of nowhere. 3 hours we were stuck on that highway that takes barely over an hour to travel normally. But it didn't end there. Just when I thought we were returning to normality, I glanced in the rear view mirror because I thought for the first time in 3 hours I'd seen headlights. I was wrong. Instead, in the back seat, sitting behind me on the driver's side, was a black human silhouette with glowing yellow eyes. Dee and I both saw it. I couldn't believe what we were experiencing. All of what happened is so unreal and so fantastical sounding, but on my life, I promise, what you've read is real and articulated to the best of my ability. The next hour and a half were just unspeakably terrifying, and mostly we just sat there in silence. We finally pulled into the pass shortly before midnight. We were stuck 2.5 hours in some sort of limbo, in this unreal anomaly kind of thing that made no sense. And then this thing in the back. And we were totally conscious and aware the whole time, making note of the time. To top it off, when we pulled into the pass, I noticed our gas barely moved. We are totally lost to an explanation of what happened. And that thing had by that time disappeared, by the way. So I don't know how to explain this, but I do know it was real, and so does my friend. This really did happen to us. We weren't on drugs. We weren't hallucinating. But I have absolutely no explanation for that. Wow, it almost seems like you somehow just drove into another sort of alternate Earth kind of world or something, kind of another dimension Earth, so to speak. I heard once of a guy in Africa who, he was just driving along on his usual road, and I think he was going to work or something, and all of a sudden, everything just changed, and there were no houses like there normally would be, or anything like that. And, it was like he had gone back like 200 years or something, and everything was just completely just wild and stuff, and he was terrified, and he just kept driving, and eventually he just sort of came out of it and he was back to a reality on the road that, that was, that he recognized and that was, like modern times. So that was almost like a time kind of slip or something. I don't know what yours was, if that was a time slip, but that entity in the back or something, I mean, that really sounds weird. Almost like maybe it was something that was created, a sort of mock up just to terrify you or mess with you. I don't know. Pretty good story, though, and certainly very, very terrifying. Something in the mud. I've never spoken about this before, so it's just too weird and too messed up. This happened when I was 5 or 6 years old, and I was staying at my dad's farm in Northern California. It was roughly 6 acres, and it was surrounded by a lot of woods and just wild areas. So this was a hot summer day, and I was just standing in the yard out by one of the barns near the edge of the woods. I had been running around playing, and I was now just killing time. I was holding a garden hose, and I was just spraying in the air and ground, etc., and just sort of playing around. I was kind of daydreaming, and I started spraying the dirt a few feet away and began to sort of dig a hole with the stream. The water would push the wet soil away, and the hole would fill with dirty water. And then I'd blast it back out again. I was doing this over and over, making the hole deeper and deeper. Eventually, have no idea how long, but a while, I had sprayed a hole a few feet deep, and I just kept spraying deeper and wider. Suddenly, all of the water, mud, just kind of fell away. Like the bottom was quickly removed. Picture a toilet flushing but very fast, leaving a dark hole about a foot or so across. Suddenly, something just sort of slapped up against the opening, filling the hole completely. I heard it sort of smack against the wet mud. It was wet and pink like flesh, but had no discernible markings or identifying features. Imagine a hole in a sheet with someone's cheek pressed to the other side, but huge. The flesh was flexing somewhat, like what your elbow might look like when you bend it, if an elbow was 2 feet wide. I just stood there, literally paralyzed. I couldn't move a muscle. I'm not sure if it was shock, but I wasn't scared so much as just sort of stunned. I remember thinking, if that's its elbow or shoulder or something, then it has to be gigantic. Suddenly, quick as it appeared, it just sort of slipped away. The whole thing just lasted maybe a minute. Water filled the hole again. I set down the hose and I walked back to the main house, then never spoke of it. Hell, I didn't even remember this story, this experience, until I was in my 30s. It's almost like something in me just sort of blanked it out all those years. But when I did remember, it was so clear. And I don't know what it was. To this day, I have no idea. Well, young children do often see things that adults can't see. That's really kind of interesting, isn't it? I wonder what it was. Perhaps some kind of nature spirit in the earth or something. Um, there are a lot of stories about those from ancient times and, from folklores and things like this that people have seen them in trees, in the ground, and so on. That's must have been pretty scary, though, for a child or an adult, for that matter.